French for healthcare professionals, German for nurses, Spanish for social workers. And we see this really big proliferation of languages for X profession. And sometimes it's kind of broad. So some places, some universities, maybe even some high schools have taken the tack of hitting it broadly by Spanish for the health professions. Others would separate that out into Spanish for doctors, Spanish for nurses, Spanish for EMTs, Spanish for first responders, Spanish for mental health care providers. So we can get very, very specific as well. Also, within those specific careers, within those broader professional categories, you see that some people are interested in doing things that are even more specific within the career. So it might be Spanish for intake forms. It might be Spanish for let's say communicable diseases. We can take this languages for specific purposes, and that word specific there can be rather broad, or we can really narrow the scope of what it is that we're doing. I think that one thing that we don't always think about is some people are also working on a language for an academic purpose. This you see a lot in ESL when there are international students that have come to the university, and they have a program that is trying to teach the international students English, and the purpose of the English for these students is to be good students, to be successful students in classes, university level classes that are given in English. So, again, just to summarize a little bit, languages for specific purposes has come to mean Arabic for business, Hindi for whatever it might be. But when I was at the AATSP this summer and speaking on the plenary panel that Mary was also speaking on, I was arguing for a less specific languages for specific purposes. So if I think about practicing professionals, if you are an EMT right now and you know that you need to use Spanish with a Spanish-speaking community that you serve, then you have a real reason to take Spanish for EMTs. But if we're working with high school students, even college students, who often are not sure what profession they're going to go into, they might think they know that they want to be doctors, but they haven't even gone through the process of applying for medical school. I think that we would serve ourselves well and serve our students well to be even less specific about what the purpose is. And I would say that what we need to be doing is training our students to be professionals. The specific purpose that we can be working on is how to behave professionally in linguistically and culturally appropriate ways. Another reason for what I'm saying to take a step back from becoming so specific is that we know that probably mostly people with college degrees, they're going to change jobs often, and they're often going to change careers. I know Darcy's on this webinar, and she's been working with doing some career coaching, and it's very interesting. She's now working with adults who are mid-career and doing mid-career transitions and helping coach them through those transitions. That's common. So why should we be so narrow when we know that our students' lives are going to be broad? Their professional careers are going to be long and broad, and will have many twists and turns to them. So what would that look like? Well, what does it mean to take a step back from Arabic for business? For me, what I see, the constants that I see come up in whatever professional arena that you're in are things like how teamwork, how to work in a team, how to lead a team, how to collaborate, how to get a better product through teamwork and not just what I see so many of my students do. Oh, we're on a team, let's divide the work. You have this, I have this, you have this, and then we'll put it all together. No, actually, we're teaching our students how to work collaboratively in teams to have superior products than what they can do on their own just by delegating. So teamwork, leadership. Leadership, I know that Mary has worked with a high school teacher, Kristen Bliss. How do you pronounce her name, Mary? Maybe Mary has her microphone off.
Yeah, I just had my microphone muted. Bliss. And also in Florida, we have Danica, who's online with us tonight, who's doing Spanish for leadership.
Okay, and so what leadership is always going to be a professional skill that our students are going to need to bring into their careers. And what we want to do is shape professionals who can have leadership roles and who are sensitive to language diversity and cultural diversity as well. So teamwork, leadership. We could talk broadly about professional communications, but I would say specifically presentations. I think that we still have a long road to hoe with our students about how to give good professional presentations. So presentations can be in a sort of business format when you are presenting a report, you're presenting your research, presenting a new product, whatever that might be, the sort of typical PowerPoint presentation that we're thinking about. The presentations can also take the form of trainings, and we, you don't have to be only in human resources to need to be able to present well to a group that you are doing a training for. I do a lot of work with my students on how to be facilitators. So our students are so used to taking on the presentation role, preparing a PowerPoint before class, and standing there in front of the class and talking for, let's say, 15 minutes, something like that, and having a moment for Q&A afterward. I find that our students are not very well equipped to be facilitators. And if you're not sure of the word facilitator, that would be someone who doesn't engage in the conversation as much as manage the conversation or the dialogue among other people. This is a really good skill that our students will need if they're ever leading meetings. And not all meetings have a facilitator, but if you have the experience of being a facilitator and you're running a meeting, you're going to run a better meeting. So presentation, facilitation, those are some communication skills in addition to writing, of course. Our students need to know how to work among different generations, and by generations I mean millennials. I'm from Generation X and baby boomers. We know that they're stepping into a workplace where they're going to be rubbing elbows with people of different ages and different generations, and so we can help them navigate those differences, because that's what we do. We help them navigate, or we teach them about navigating across cultures. We can also use that same lens, that same skill that we have as instructors to turn the spotlight onto generations. I'm also very interested in how we can teach our students to be professionals who create workplaces that are accessible to people with disabilities. And by this, I don't just mean building ramps and having bars in the toilet, in the bathroom. I mean being culturally sensitive and inviting people with disabilities to collaborate with you in ways that actually make your company even better than it would have been if you didn't put those that thinking in place. And so when I say let me also just say that I think that our students also need the professional skill of an entrepreneurial mindset and financial literacy. So just to summarize, yes, it's wonderful to have these courses that are business Spanish. I teach that. It's wonderful to have courses that are specifically for social workers. I would love to teach a course like that too. But what I end up seeing is that the needs of the students in these courses are often at the very foundation similar across all of these professions. If you think about these courses as radically different, if you think about Spanish for social work being radically different than Spanish for, let's say, nurses, then probably what you're thinking about is the specific vocabulary that those two professions need that are, in fact, probably very different. But if you're thinking about the daily if you're thinking about the kinds of strategies that these professionals use to communicate with and care for or have good interactions with their clients, patients, whatever name that person in that role has, they're often very similar. You need good communication skills with them. You need to listen well. You need to be filling out forms with them. You need to make sure that your instructions are simplified and clear, and you need to be able to do comprehension checks to make sure that those explanations have been understood before you send them off with a complex prescription that they have to fill out and then take correctly. So the actual daily activities of many professionals have a lot in common. It's when we get to specific vocabulary that things are divergent. And I don't think that any of us want to be designing our languages for specific courses merely thinking of them as long vocabulary lists that students will memorize and as they are, let's say, sophomores in college and will never use until they graduate or perhaps go to professional school after that, and maybe 5 years down the road, they won't even remember that vocabulary that they memorized in your course. So I'm going to take a pause here for a moment. I talked a long time about a rather simple question, what is languages for specific purposes? Let me see if any of you have any questions about this or if Mary has anything she'd like to say.
Yeah, I would just add in that I totally agree. I don't know how everyone else feels about it, but I think what you're saying about the vocabulary lists and the focus on that has really probably been what's intimidated people for even offering that kind of course, whereas those communication skills and just the real world practical skills are what need to be integrated into these courses. So hopefully that is a mind shift that's coming along.
I see that Sarah has asked to know a little bit more about facilitators, and I think later on Mary wanted to ask me about some specific activities that I do with my students, and I can talk more about that then, Sarah, and I can even share some of my materials with you. And I know Darcy has the rubric that I developed for that for my students. Darcy has utilized that with her students too, and so we both can talk to you about how that has worked for us.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, and as anybody has a question as we're going along, go ahead and type it in as Sarah did, and I'm sorry, Sarah, that I missed that. So yeah, so you don't forget your idea, go ahead and type it in, and if Amy can take it at the moment, she can, or we can cover it like in this instance with the activity. But I did want to ask Annie a question about the mindset that's necessary to make this shift of integrating this kind of content into foreign language classes, and ask her how did she get motivated to teach these kind of courses, so others can kind of, just so we have an example of what makes you kind of change your way of thinking to go away from just totally traditional language content.
Well, I'll give you my personal story, and then I'd be really interested to hear from other people too, what their personal approaches to this have been and why they've become interested in this. So just to back up 45 years, my family had a business. So my father was an entrepreneur. My father had his own business. I come from a very, very small town in southern Illinois where that actually has oil. They're not gushers, but there's oil, and my father had a business that made oil-filled tanks. So I won't go into the explanation of what that means, but I grew up in a family business. I married a man who is coincidentally from Italy, and he is an entrepreneur, and he has his own high-tech company. He's a physicist by training, and he makes biomedical instrumentation, and has about 40 employees, and sells instruments around the globe. And so I got a PhD in Spanish literature, thinking that I didn't like business, thinking that I didn't want to have anything to do with what my father and then my husband had to do. And here I came around to actually wanting to do business and wanting to teach about business in my courses. But really, what I was just talking about before, what I really want to teach in my courses, I teach it through business, but what I really am interested in are these professional skills. And so that's my personal background. And then in terms of when it dawned on me that this was really necessary is when I started doing, I believe it was 2004, I started teaching community service learning, Spanish in the community. And my students were working first at the Refugee Center, which would be a human services agency, or you could liken it to social work, I would say. And then the next year they started working in a local primary school with a bilingual education program. And what I saw was that to be successful in the community, I was putting these students into professional contexts. And Darcy and I did research on this, and what you see, and we've published about this, and what you see is that yes, Spanish community service learning is about students need language skills, they need skills that have to do with culture, but they really need some training in professional behaviors and professional tasks. And so sometimes the failures or the frustrations that my students would have in their Spanish community service learning were failures in just professional tasks, behaviors, not because my students aren't very capable and aren't very smart. They are all of those things with lots of energy and lots of desire to do good. Many of them have not worked in an office setting, or they have not worked in an educational setting. And those are professional contexts that we're putting them in. And so it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that there is great overlap between community service learning and languages for specific purposes. Mary, is there anything you'd like to add, or if anyone has anything to say, I'm happy to talk about that now.
Well, that was interesting, because actually I didn't even know all that about your personal background to this point, so that was enlightening. I don't know if anybody from the audience wanted to, we got a few comments in the chat box that we could probably address afterwards.
I will say that, I happen to have that background, of which my father and my husband, so business has always been a part of my family. I happen to have that background. You do not have to have that background to be able to teach languages for specific purposes. And it's just, I wouldn't want anyone to be scared away just because I said that I had that in my own background.
Good, yeah, that's a great point. So I'm looking at the clock, and actually we are starting to get short on time. So let's go ahead and move on to having you give at least a couple of examples of activities that you do, that you have on your web link, and
well,
Claire, and that might match with one of Claire's comments here. But if you can talk about some of your activities and how your students have responded to them.
Okay, so first I just want to give a broader context. I teach this course called Spanish in the Community, and I wrote a textbook for that. It's called Comunidades Más Allá del Aula from Pearson. And in that textbook, I think people are surprised that a community service learning textbook, which deals a lot with immigration and kind of issues like related to recent immigrants, why is there a section on how to answer the phone? Why is there a section on how to take phone messages? Because, again, these are those professional tasks that my students were having trouble carrying out and put in jeopardy some of those community partnerships that I had developed because of that. So I teach Spanish in the community, and like Sarah, I think Sarah wrote that her students do internships in many different places, and in some professions that she's not personally familiar with. That would be the same for me in my Spanish in the community course. Then I teach just a traditional business Spanish course, which uses Éxito Comercial as the textbook, which is the most common textbook, I would say, that people use for business Spanish. And then in that business Spanish course this semester, at the beginning of the semester, I said to myself, I want my students to leave this course not just having gone through the textbook. I want them to leave this course with a hard skill that they can put on their resume and that they can sell, that they can use to sell themselves when they go on job interviews. And so this semester my students have worked as social media marketing consultants for local organizations here in Champaign-Urbana. So I had a class of 17 students. I divided them into 5 groups. There were 5 clients. One was our refugee center. 2 of them were after-school programs for Latino children. There were 5 total. Actually, Darcy ended up being one of the clients for me. So you can see where these the clients force the students to use their language and cultural knowledge in their communications and their marketing in one social media marketing venue. So, for example, one team did the Facebook page for the Refugee Center. One team did the Twitter feed for another client. One team worked with Darcy on her Pinterest posts. And so that is a big project. And I'm not recommending that anyone who isn't passionate about social media marketing go ahead and do that in their class. But what I can say to you is that even just thinking about having your students analyze the social media marketing of one company in the target language and target culture of your course can be very interesting. So, for example, this semester, one of the lessons that we had, we went to Goya, the food company that is Latino-inspired. It's actually a U.S. company. And we looked at their website, but then we looked at their Twitter, their Facebook, their Pinterest, and their YouTube channels, and we analyzed each of those different social media platforms to see when did they use English, when did they use Spanish, how did they engage with their customers. So, for example, who did they retweet, and how did they manage those retweets? How did they handle, specifically on Twitter, how did they handle service complaints? How did they answer to people who posted negative feedback on these? So if you could just pick one rather well-known company in the target language and target culture, the course that you teach, and look at their social media platforms, there are lots of little lessons that your students can cull just from an analysis of the pictures, of the videos, of the posts, of the links that they see there. So that course is ending up. I'll teach the last class of that tomorrow, and I'm sure later I'll have much more to say about that course after I've had a chance to think it through. I also teach Spanish and entrepreneurship, and that is where I teach students about social entrepreneurship specifically, and it is how to build nonprofits that do programming that is linguistically and culturally appropriate. And those students are doing Spanish, they're doing community service learning as well. So the purpose for their community service learning is, of course, always to work on their Spanish and to work on their awareness of Latino cultures, but they're also working in these nonprofit organizations to compare always what we're learning theoretically about social entrepreneurship and what they're seeing on the ground in practice, and often there's a big discrepancy between the two of those. So I just wanted to give an idea of the courses that I teach. So I gave an example of an activity that I've done in my business Spanish course this year by looking at Goya. Another thing that I had them do in that course was take a look at a specific job ad that had to do, because we were working so much on social media marketing, there was a Chicago-based company called La Criolla, and they had a job ad looking specifically for a social media marketing person. And I had students go through the job ad, and I told them to circle all of the qualifications, the characteristics that the job ad mentioned, put a circle on the ones that they already knew how to do. This is something I do, I've worked on in this course, I've learned about it, I've implemented it. Circle, I've got this down. And then I said, now underline the things that the job ad is asking for that you do not know how to do, that you do not have any experience with. So after they had done that, I said, okay, now your task is, for everything that you've underlined, I want you to circulate amongst your classmates here and talk to people who circled that, who circled something that you underlined, and pick their brains. Ask them to teach you about what they know on this job ad that you don't know, and if you can't find it, then you sit down and you Google it, and you do Google, for example, tutorials on whatever, MailChimp was one of the things that very few students knew about and knew how to use. And so for me, that lesson was about many different things. It was about how to carefully read a job ad. It was about analyzing your own strengths and weaknesses. It was about how to be resourceful, not just when you're looking at job ads, but in general, looking at the people around you as resources, and not being afraid to ask people to teach you something that you don't know, and to teach people things that you know that they don't know, but also how to be resourceful online too. And then in the end, I said, you know, how many of you would consider applying for this job? And almost no one said that, and the reasons were varied, but many of them said, but I can't do everything that the job ad says. And one of the takeaways I wanted students to have from that is that you don't need to be able to do everything that a job ad says. You have to show that you are resourceful, that you can learn those things, and shine the light on the things that you already do. So I wanted them to approach the thoughts that they have about themselves, the thoughts that they have about job ads, differently than they would have before we did that exercise. And now there's one last sort of example of an activity that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to click on a web link, and what's going to happen probably is that you're going to be taken to a website. And to get back to this, I'll have to tell you how to do that in a moment. But right now I'm going to click on that on my Facebook page. Let's see. I hope that everyone can see it now. If you can't see it, will you please write in the chat box that you can't see it? And Mary, I can't look at the chat box.
I'm checking the chat box.
Okay. So what I hope that you're seeing is my Facebook page that's called UIUC Spanish Community Service Learning, and this is where I put a lot of resources and lesson plans for my students. And I start my classes usually by saying, okay, fire up your cell phones, open up your laptops, and go to Facebook. And we go to my Facebook page. And this is just an example of a lesson plan that I did about advertising. And so what I did was say, okay, here's a picture of me. Like I told you before, my husband is from Italy. This is a picture of in our kitchen in Italy. And I say, what does this picture have to do with coffee? And my students say, oh, you have a coffee cup in your hands. And I say, yes. What else do you see in this picture that is about coffee? My students couldn't name anything else. I know you don't have your microphones on. I wish that you did have your microphones on, because I wonder if you can see something else in this picture that is about coffee. And it is the coffee machine that is sitting on the stove. But because my students are all used to Mr. Coffee drip machines, the 10-cup coffee pot that you pull out from the drip machine, they couldn't even recognize what they were seeing as having to do with coffee. And so for me, that was a really important moment to show them about culture and how we're blind to, if you don't know about something, you can't see it. And I felt that this was a particularly telling example of that. And then if you're interested, you can just see that I have a lot of links here to commercials on YouTube for coffee. And what we did was we went through these, and students had to identify the cultural elements in each of these commercials. And the cultural elements were things like the kind of music that was playing in the Colombian coffee commercials was very different from the Dominican Republic commercials. It was just a different style of Latin music in both of those. You could see the racial profiles were different of the actors within the commercials depending upon the country, the Latin American country that it was from. And then if you get more towards the bottom, you could see, I wanted them to see that there are examples of a Ili, an Italian coffee marketing to a Spanish-speaking market. And the same company, Ili, using the same commercial, but then it was for Brazil, and showing them how you can have the same commercial and just using voiceovers in different languages. And one that was very interesting was this Café Colombiano, Corea del Sur, and it was Colombian coffee marketing itself to South Korea, and the very interesting cultural aspects that you saw there. And then in the end, at the very end, there's the Café Bustelo tutorial, and that's where my students were able to see one way. It's actually not the way that I prepare coffee in my mocha on the stove top. I do it the Italian style, but this was a Cuban style of making coffee in the same kind of mocha cafetiera that you see up there. And so my students had, this was all very new for them. But also, in the end, talking about the importance of coffee in business culture, in meetings and in dinners and when you go to people's homes. So this all came together in the end with a conclusion about you might not like coffee, you might not know very much about coffee, but it is actually pretty indispensable when we're in business. So I hope that I have shared, I've talked about some activities that I do with my business Spanish students. I know that some of you are interested in things like social work and healthcare, and I haven't given any examples about that, but I hope that these have been helpful in some way. And now if you are like me, you have to go to the bottom of your screen and you have to click back on the Adobe icon to get back to the webinar.
Yeah, I think unfortunately some people didn't find the window, because I'm on my Mac, it just shows up on a tab.
Okay.
So I think, but I put the link, so I hope some people at least got to open the link. I see Jason's typing something. Oh, it only works in oh, okay. Huh. Yeah, well, I would think if you copy and pasted the link, it would work. Anyway, so I apologize for that, but hopefully you guys can look at that later. So, okay, we're actually getting pretty close on time, and I'm sure you all have other things to do. So we had a few more. Questions, but I wanted to let you guys actually ask some things, and then I wanted to make a mention of future webinars coming up in the spring with different people working in the field. So let me see, it's 8:25. I'm going to just shoot ahead on here with a couple of these slides and then give everybody the microphone to ask some questions to Annie, and people can kind of stay in as long as they want to, asking questions as long as Annie's willing to talk. But I did want to let you guys know to go and check the Noble website for resources. I'll post some more of Annie's things there. There's a lot of resources there already. All information on upcoming webinars is on there also. Here is a list of a few starting in January, and the idea for these is hopefully to be as interactive as possible and bring in a variety of people to talk on different topics, bringing in K through 12 as well as higher ed people, get a nice mix. At least tonight it's nice. We do have more higher ed, but we have a few K through 12, couple K through 12, so hopefully that will increase. So here is a list of a few that'll be on the website. More dates in March, and I'm still confirming who can participate. Hopefully Margaret, who's with us tonight, is going to talk about case studies. And for any of you that are interested in proposing a topic and sharing what you're doing in the classroom, I would love to hear from you, and we can add you in at some point. So I'm going to skip all of this stuff. I'll leave with Annie's and mine, our contact information, and I'm going to go ahead and give the mic to everyone and hope we don't get too much feedback. So if people want to ask some questions either in the chat box or through your microphone, we'll see how it works. I know we had a couple questions already in the chat box we could go back to, actually. Jason's question, Annie, do you see the trend being intro to the professions, more general courses, and then more advanced courses becoming more specific?
Yeah, I think that, no, that is not the trend. I think that the trend is towards specific professions, but I think that we should question that trend or start a new one. So, no, I don't think it's common for people to be taking a more broad approach to languages for specific purposes, but I think that we do need to get those broad issues in there, whether or not it's inside of a course shell that has a very specific focus or not.
Okay, and I'm trying to, there was one more, there was a question maybe from Sarah. You know, I'm going to change the layout on this so I think the chat shows a little better. Let's see. No, I didn't make it that much bigger. Okay. Huh.
Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to use the mic to ask?
Please don't be shy. Or type if you're saying something and we can't hear you.
What types of role-playing do you do? Jason, I see your question here about role-playing. Honestly, I often do not do role-playing in the terms of asking students, you're the doctor and you're the patient, now solve, figure out what her diagnosis is. I personally shy away from those kinds of activities because I find that my students simply don't have the knowledge to be able to do those kinds of role plays. However, if the role play were something like, now it's going to be difficult for me to think of something off the top of my head, but if it were something that a student could actually do, but they didn't need that professional knowledge to be able to carry out, then I would be happy to do role plays and simulations like that. So for example, if you wanted to do a role play of, I'm going to do this intake form for you, that is a perfectly plausible role play because actually students can do that. They have that information and that knowledge to be able to carry that out. But when it gets to things like you're the CEO of this company and you're the CEO of this company and you need to figure out if you're going to have a merger or not. I just see limited use to that because of the students' lack of knowledge about how to actually carry out those things. Sarah, I see you're asking about guest speakers. You know who the best guest speakers that I've are my former students. And so I don't know if all of you probably do this just like I do, stay in touch with a lot of your former students. And so I have had a student who was working at a very interesting nonprofit in Los Angeles called Homeboy Industries. She Skyped in one time to talk to us. I had a student who was doing research in entrepreneurship on a Fulbright in Spain and had done interviews with all kinds of nonprofits in Spain for that research project. She Skyped in with us just the year after she graduated. So, she was looking at, as she was Skyping in, she was looking at the chairs that she had just been sitting in the year before. I have a student who wants to Skype in. She does social media marketing for the State Department. And, the list goes on and on about former students who could be guest speakers. And I have found that students respond best to people who are young, who were in their seats not too long ago. And Sarah, if you have any other suggestions for guest speakers, please speak up or type it up into the chat. Let's see. When students create real content. Oh, Sarah, you have just hit on the bane of my existence, the editing that we need to do when we have students create real-world content. I do not have a good answer to that, except you have to really do a lot of work, and you have to keep pushing it back to the students until it is of high quality. And, I think that, we often in language classes, the message to our students is, the content is the most important, and I know you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And then all of a sudden they get into one of our courses that are languages for specific purposes, where they're creating real documents for real clients, and suddenly we raise the bar on them, and they have to do things really well. My first reaction is always, oh my God, now I have to go through and edit all of this. And I'm trying to teach myself to take it back to the students and say, you can do better than this. You need to give this one more go before I take a look at it. Of course, giving them some feedback, but wow, it takes a lot of time, and you have to build that into your calendar, build it into your syllabus, because it will always take longer for the editing process than you imagined. Darcy, manage expectations with community members too, so they know the limits of language students to produce documents in their L2. Exactly. So you might say to your community partners, my students can give you a not professional quality document, but it can be a start for you that you can then give to a professional to clean up. I don't know if that's always a good idea or not, or you could say, whatever it is, Darcy is absolutely right. Don't make the mistake of promising professional level quality if we know that our students can't deliver that. Oh, Darcy, those are such great things to say. Simplify, yes. Simplify what it is that you are at, the language. So the idea that Darcy suggests of giving a bullet list, asking students to produce a bullet list instead of a report, is going to allow them to avoid those complex long sentences where they trip themselves up over the more complex grammar items that they don't control yet. So those are very good pieces of advice, Darcy. Thank you so much. But still, it is never easy, and it never is. You need to work it into your schedule, and I would suggest always building in timed days into your course calendar where you workshop those documents more than once before they go out. I see Jason is typing. Darcy's typing. What types of assessments do you do to test over a chapter's content? Jason, again, this is a really challenging question when you are doing real-world types of work with students. So if your question is like, if you use éxito comercial to teach business Spanish, or if you use whatever textbook might be available, I don't know if there is one available for German, then you would handle assessments just the way that you would handle them in any other course. I would suppose that you would do some vocabulary testing, and you would do maybe some grammar testing if you had done that in the course, and then you would have some matching content questions, and probably a short answer, and then a longer essay. You know, if you wanted to, you could imagine if you're teaching, let me back up, the maxim always is you have to test the way that you teach, test what you teach and how you teach. So if you are following a program that is book-based and classroom-based, I don't think that your assessments are going to be very different than any other language class that you're teaching. The rub is when you are sort of bridging the community and the classroom and having students to actually engage in these professional contexts, and then the types of assessments that you do are different, and but not always. I mean, even an essay question is a good question to get at what did you learn by doing this project for this client. Or a final exam that I often give to students is, here's a job interview question, answer it giving specific examples from the work that you've done for the project in this class. And that's an assessment of how they can connect those. They can talk about their learning in a job interview question or a cover letter. So yes, assessments, Jason, I agree, it is a question, and I think that we don't have to abandon how we do assessments and what we know about assessments just in regular foreign language courses. We can use those still in our languages for specific purposes courses as well. Sarah. Set the limits. Yes, Sarah, I'm reading what you wrote, and so there are 2 points I think that you're making here. Agreeing with Darcy that the community partners have to know what they can expect and what they cannot expect, but also I think what you're pointing to here is knowing that you need to give it more than one class period to workshop these types of documents and PowerPoints or reports or whatever they might be. What are some of the unique challenges and outcomes for native versus non-native speakers? Very good question, Linda. You know, I have a mix of students in my courses. I have several heritage speakers right now in my business Spanish course, for example. And you know, I think they're the same challenges that we have in any language course where we have second language learners and heritage language learners in the same class. That the language needs for the second language learners are, I don't know if I want to say more, but they're different than what the non-native speakers need. But specifically in a business Spanish course, I really have to say, you know, it's first impressions, and when you write a document, a professional document to a client, if you don't use accent marks, it doesn't give a good impression. But then I can turn around and say to the second language learners, when you don't use the commas where you're supposed to, or when you say querido, somebody that you don't even know in a professional context, dear, using an informal way of saying dear, or you don't use a correct way of, or you use informal tú with them instead of ustedes in a business letter, you are giving a bad first impression too. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that while the heritage language learners and the second language learners have different challenges and needs in the languages for specific purposes classroom, I think the examples are always come down to, yeah, you might have this kind of problem, you might have this other kind of problem, but the effect is always going to be the same. When you're working in a professional context and you need basically perfection, you need to have very high standards, and you all have a road to go to meet those high standards. That was a very long way of saying that it's a very good question that I don't have wonderful answers to, but it is important for us to continue looking at. And Linda, I don't know what you're teaching or where you're teaching or what level you're teaching at. If that's a question that is of interest to you and that you're seeing in your classroom, I would really encourage you to do some basic research on that question. Sarah, communication with community partners and collaborating on supervision is a challenge. Any tips? Oh, well, Sarah, this is kind of harsh, but this is what I'm going to say about that. That there are some community organizations that kind of can't be our community partners. If they can't be co-teachers with us, if they can't adequately supervise the students and the projects that the students are working on, if the load is falling on us in the classroom, that's a partnership that might not be working out for the best, or not, at least not for the types of projects that they want students to do or you want students to do for them. So it's either scale back the kinds of projects that the students need to do for that community organization, or unfortunately you have to partner with community organizations that have more resources and more capacity to be able to supervise and volunteer those students. I know it's a harsh thing to say because we want to help the community as much as possible, and often the organizations that need the most help are the ones who are least capable of adequately supervising our students in this kind of project work. But I think you have to scale it. You have, if you don't get very much supervision, collaboration from a community partner, then you need to have a smaller scale project. Last semester, some of my translators on a group translation had really helpful editing help from the mom of one of the heritage speakers. They produced a really high quality translation of a family handbook for the juvenile drug court by collaborating as a group of heritage and non. That is very good. Linda, you're welcome. Mary, I just submitted a project to assess Noble for some business students, and I had to agree that I would spend so much time with the students. Right, so it's setting up those expectations of what the partner's role is, and if the partner can't give you that supervision and that collaboration that you will need to have a quality product, then you just can't, you probably should not try to do that product. Any more questions? I'm really enjoying reading what you're writing and seeing what you're doing as well. I see Jason is typing.
Yeah, I think it looks like there should be a session where it's just questions because people have a lot that they find out.
Did you have anyone prepare marketing materials? Well, Jason, my students this semester, all semester long, were doing social media marketing, and that's a kind of marketing material in the sense that it's this, they have to produce the text, or they have to produce images, or they have to find the links and do it on a daily basis. Now, in terms, you might be asking about flyers. You might be asking about brochures or ads. I personally have never had students do that, but I think it's a good idea. I think that Again, you'll just have, if it's in the target language, I think what you're going to run up against is how much editing do you have to do, and how much time should you build into your calendar to make sure that it is very high quality. I have great students at the University of Illinois, and they do not hand in professional level work ever the very first time. I run into roadblocks with liability risk. The university is very afraid of community partners in the medical and criminal justice fields. I'm involved with American Prison Writing Archive, which documents. Sarah, you raise a very good point when we, again, let me just make clear to everyone that you do not have to marry community service learning and languages for specific purposes. It's not necessary. It is rich, and it is good, and it is what people like Sarah, Darcy, and I love to do, but you don't have to. So I hope that through this discussion, you aren't going to feel like I can't teach languages for specific purposes because I don't have a community partner. That's not the case. But now back to Sarah's issue. Does your university have a service learning office? You're right. And, you know, Sarah, I would say there's a reason to be fearful. Fearful might not be the word, but, you know, if you are managing risk, if you're the person in an office that has to think about your insurance contracts for the university, then, yes, I can understand that viewpoint. And so I think that what we have to do, oh, Sarah, that is such a good point. You know, children translating, yes. Could your students help with that? You know, I am not comfortable with putting my students in that situation and giving them that responsibility because I don't think that my students are up to that task. However, if at our universities we could start to think about languages for specific purposes as not just a course here and a course there, but integrated throughout the curriculum, we might be able to produce students who, before they graduate, that when maybe they're juniors or something, could be doing this level of work. And so if we think about it as, I'm just teaching this one course, I think it's very unlikely that your students are going to be able to start the course, have a couple of weeks introduction, and then start doing the kinds of medical translation work that you're talking about. But if they can start doing that throughout, and you know, throughout many of their courses, or doing that as an honors project that they want to do each semester that's on top of their regular coursework, I think it's necessary for us to start thinking about how we can mitigate some of that risk as well. Because I don't want to say that it isn't risky. It is. And you know, Sarah, because you know what the, you know how delicate these things are and why we shouldn't have children doing it for their parents, for the very reasons that we are afraid of having some students do it as well. Mary, what were you saying yes to? Or were you saying that yes, it is a delicate balance? Is there some other point that you wanted to make?
Well, everything you've said all night, of course, is yes, because you have great comments. But I was thinking about the LSP across the curriculum and not making it like, oh, it's only a specific course. I mean, this needs to be expanded across disciplines and across the universities and K through 12 schools.
And we can do that if we think about languages as for specific purposes as just a module in an existing course, or a way of testing, a way of assessment like Jason was talking about. What if in a literature course your final exam was an interview question or a cover letter that you had to write for a job that was somehow related to the literature course? What if we thought about honors projects that our students, at least in my university, students do honors projects, and could that be related to LSP? Could there be a study abroad program that integrates LSP, giving students lots of different opportunities to develop the language skills and the professional skills they need to be successful at these things. You're seeing Professor Davis from Nicaragua to extreme. And Sarah, when you mentioned that trip to Nicaragua, I think supervised by a doctor that you put in parentheses is a key point. And that's a wonderful, wonderful experience. Yet in the U.S., due to liability, we must really limit the hands-on experience. This is an area that needs work. Sarah, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about doing some work in that area? I mean, I know you're very busy right now with many different things going on in your life, but I'd love it if you did some writing about this or some urging of people, directions which we can go down to think about how do we handle the liability issue, how do we meet community needs, pressing community needs, what happens if we don't interact with those communities. So the sort of ethical choices are you don't want to put students in risky situations, but what are those situations, what are the risks of those situations if students aren't present? These are big questions that you're putting forth, Sarah, and I'd love to see your thinking about this.
Okay, it's 10 to 9, so I guess we could be wrapping up here. Oh, wait, Sarah's got it.
Jason, you were typing, so go ahead and finish your thought. I'd be happy
to
read it and write. The idea of graduating doctorate treat in the target language means that people receive inadequate. Yes, Sarah, I agree. Oh, Jason, you were saying that you have to go. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, Jason. You've had some great questions and comments.
Sarah, more than inviting you, it sounds like you should be a speaker sometime. So we'll keep you
exactly,
in mind, Sarah. Jason, I'm glad it was helpful. Good luck with your work. I'd love to connect with you and know more about what you're doing or what you're thinking about doing. You can contact me anytime.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And as Annie said, any of you could be the guest to bring up the different topics. That's the whole thing. We want to get this going where it's interactive and people bringing up relevant topics so we can move this field forward. So thanks to Annie.
Darcy, Margaret, thank you. Thank you, Mary, for organizing this. We know that everything, when we do it the first time, and it's an experiment, but I think that we really started getting steam, and there's much more to talk about. So good luck with your following webinars, too.
Yeah, and thank you for everyone for coming, and please check off the calendar for the next one starting in January. Thanks to everybody. Have a great holiday.